All right, so now that we've created this little section of our page for enabling or disabling link sharing for a given note, the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to create the endpoints for enabling and disabling link sharing. This is where we're going to add these two properties that we talked about here, right? The link sharing enabled and the link sharing hash to each of our notes. But first, what I'm going to do here, I'm going to remove this true default value, since that's obviously not what we want if the link sharing enabled doesn't exist. That was just there so that we could see what it would look like if link sharing was enabled. All right, so what this is going to look like, let's open up our backend and go into routes. And what we're going to do here is we're going to create a new file, two new files really. The first one is going to be a route for enabling link sharing. So we'll say enable link sharing route.js. And we're going to create a new file here, which will be disable link sharing route. Now, for both of these routes, I guess we'll just go through them one at a time. For enabling link sharing, what we're going to do is we're going to say export const enable link sharing route. And what this is going to look like, the path here is going to be similar to what we had for updating our notes, right? So the path here was just /note/note ID, just as an example. So for enabling link sharing, we're going to say /notes/note ID /enable sharing. Okay? And that's not necessarily the most restful path name for this route here, but it'll serve its purpose just fine. The next thing here we're going to do is specify the method. This one is just going to be a put method, since it's updating something, and we're going to want that to be lowercase, since that'll be the name of a method on our express route. And we are going to have middleware, but I'll discuss that in just a minute here after we write out the basics for the route handler. So for the handler, what this is going to look like, it's of course going to be async, and it's going to look just like any other route handler that we've defined so far. So let's talk about the things that we're going to need to do in this route. First thing we're going to need to do is make sure that the user who's sending this request actually owns the note. Now, we already have a middleware for that, so that's one thing we'll have to do, is make sure that they own the note. And the next thing we're going to need to do is generate a link sharing hash for our note, right? This makes sure that we have some other kind of random thing besides the note's ID that we can use for identifying the note when users try and access it via a link. So we're going to generate that using the UUID package, right? You're already familiar with this one by now, I'm sure. And once we have that, we're going to make a few changes to our note in the database. First of all, we're going to set link sharing enabled, right? We're going to add a property here, which will be something like link sharing enabled. And we're going to want to set that to true, of course. And we're also going to add the link sharing hash property that we had from before, which will be this randomly generated thing that we have here. And finally, what we're going to do after that is send back this updated note to the client side, including these two new properties on there, so that the client side will be able to successfully display the link sharing hash and know that the note is now enabled. All right, so that's our basic plan of attack. What I'm going to do here is just open up one of our other routes, such as the update note route, because we're going to need similar middleware for that. And for this one, what we're going to do, we want to make sure that the user owns the note. And I believe we already have middleware for that. Let's just take a look here. Yep, user owns note. So we're going to want that one. We're going to want verify auth token to make sure the user is logged in. We're going to also want user email is verified to make sure that the user is verified before doing this. Okay, and as far as user can edit note, we don't want that one because we don't want just any user to be able to turn link sharing on. We only want the note's owner to be able to turn that on. So what that's going to look like, we're going to go into our enable link sharing route. We're going to add the verify auth token middleware, and that was just automatically imported for me. Let me just adjust the double quotes here. I really need to fix that at some point. And the next thing we're going to do is check to make sure that the user's email is verified, so we'll import that as well. And last but not least, we want to make sure that the user owns the note. So we'll say user owns note, and that's something we're going to need to import as well. I don't know why it didn't do that automatically for me, but we'll just say import user owns note from middleware / user owns note. Okay. And now that we have that all set up, Let me just make sure that that's the correct name here. Yep, user owns note. Now that we have that all set up, we're just going to need to write out some of the basic logic in this handler. So as I said, the first thing we're going to need to do is generate a new code, right? A link sharing hash, we're calling it, for our note. So I'm going to import the UUID package by saying import v4 as UUID from UUID. And then down here, what we're going to do is say const link sharing. Oops, there we go. Link sharing hash equals UUID. Okay, so now that we have that, we're going to want to update the note in the database so that we have this link sharing hash added to it. So what that's going to look like, we're going to bring in our notes DB, which again we did in update note route, so we can just use a similar approach. So we're going to import the notes DB from notes DB into our enable link sharing route. And then down here, we're going to update the note with this ID by saying const result equals await notes DB. And we're going to use the find one and update function here. So find one and update. And of course, we're going to want to find the note with the ID up here in the URL parameter. So we're going to have to get that by saying const note ID equals, and we're going to say request.params. And then down here, we'll say ID note ID. And the updates object here is going to look like this. We're going to say $set. And we're going to set link sharing to true, or link sharing enabled to true. We'll say link sharing enabled true. And under that, we're going to insert the link sharing hash that we generated up here. And last but not least, once we've actually updated this thing, we're going to want to make sure that we get the updated version of that note back from this MongoDB query. And for that, as you may remember, we can say return document after. Okay, I believe that's what it is. Let me just check that real quick. Return document after. Yep, okay, so that's the right thing. Just wanted to make sure because that little thing has bit me before. So anyway, now that we have the result, we can get the updated note by getting the value property of this result. Again, that's just something that we've seen in the past when using find one and update. So we're going to say const updated note equals result.value. And then we're going to send the updated note back to the client. So we'll say response.json updated note. Awesome, and that should be all we need to do for our enable link sharing routes. So let's give this thing a try. What we're going to do is we're going to open up our sharing settings page for our notes. And inside this enable link sharing thing, we're going to make our network request. Now, what I'm going to recommend you do here is very similar to what we did for our share note and unshare note functions. We're going to actually add these methods to our notes context so that any component that needs them can access them instead of having to write out all of the logic ourselves. So what that's going to look like, we're going to add an enable link sharing and disable link sharing function to our notes context. And it's starting to get rather long here, and we're starting to see these side scroll. So I'm going to just indent all of these like so. Okay, so once we've actually created enable link sharing and disable link sharing, I'm going to just comment out disable link sharing because we won't create that yet. We're going to actually call those from inside this function here. And I guess actually I should probably call this something else since this is the exact name of our function here. So let's call this one on enable link sharing and on disable link sharing. And of course, we'll change those down here. We're going to say on click, on enable link sharing, and on click, on disable link sharing. Okay, so now that we've changed those names, let's actually call this enable link sharing thing from inside our on enable link sharing function. What this is going to look like, we're going to say await enable link sharing, and this function is obviously going to have to take the note ID for the note that we're enabling link sharing for. So for that, we're just going to use this note ID thing that we got from the URL parameters. So we'll say enable link sharing, note ID. All right, so let's head over now to our notes context and actually add these things, or our notes provider rather. We're going to open that up here. And we're going to just add two functions here for enabling and disabling link sharing. So we'll say const enable link sharing. As we've already established, this is going to take the ID of the note as an argument here. And what we're going to do is make a request to the endpoint we just created. So we'll say try. And what we're going to do here is we're going to say const updated note equals await. And this request here is going to be put. So we'll say put. And the URL is going to be in backticks here because we're going to need the note ID /notes/ and then what we're going to do is insert the note ID and say /enable sharing. I think that's what that was. Let me just go back here and check. Yep, enable sharing. In fact, let's change this to enable link sharing just so it's a little more descriptive. So enable link sharing. And once we get that response back from the server here, what we're going to do is we're going to update that note in the notes member variable up here. Or not member variable, but state variable. So let's go down here, and the way that we're going to do that is pretty much the same way that we've done it before. In fact, I'm just going to copy and paste this. We're going to say set notes.map, blah, blah, blah. And instead of updating shared with updated emails, we're going to just say updated note or the unchanged note. All right, and once we've done that, we're going to have to add a catch block, which will catch any errors that occur. And for now, we're just going to say console.log e. Probably not the ideal course of action, but again, for now, it'll work. Cool, so that's our enable link sharing function. We're going to have to create another disable link sharing one as well. So I'll just write the stub of that. And it's going to look pretty similar to what we just did in enable link sharing, except obviously it's going to disable it. So the request is going to go to a different endpoint. All right, so let's give this thing a try now. We just need to add enable link sharing down here to what we're providing from our notes context provider. So we'll add enable link sharing, and while we're at it, let's just add disable link sharing as well. All right, so our front end and back end should be running. One other thing that I almost forgot was we need to add this enable link sharing route to our routes array inside index. So let's just add that here. We'll say enable link sharing route, and well, we don't have disable link sharing route yet, so we'll just leave that empty. And just to make sure that everything is looking good there, yep, it looks like our server's listening. It looks like we don't have any errors on our front end, so let's try this thing out. All right, what we're going to do, we're going to refresh this and click on enable link sharing, and what should happen is this should display the proper link, and this thing should say disable link sharing. So let's try that out. We're going to click on it, and sure enough, we see that it shows this big URL with the randomly generated hash that we created, and the button now says disable link sharing. If we refresh this thing now, we'll see that it says the same thing. Great, so we've enabled ourselves to enable link sharing. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.